Now, let us, without further ado, go to Mr. Neil Oliver, archaeologist, TV presenter, who wrote a piece in the Sunday Times at the weekend in which he said that Scotland is making me sick and it's not COVID that's to blame. Neil, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Good to see you.
Yeah, things are going from bad to worse up there, aren't they? I mean, it's one thing. I mean, you said to me during the week that your kids or kids in Scotland have been wearing masks for quite a long time already. How's that working out?
Well, we've had, I think, a lot of the media coverage tends to, focus on the announcements that are coming from, from Boris Johnson and from the government in Westminster, and we've been walking a different road, and I would say that we've had a tighter lockdown for longer than, say, south of the border. And certainly, I was interested in a lot of the debate that was going on, or the conversations that were going on about, kids having to wear masks at school, because the senior kids in high school here, which takes in two of my kids, they've been wearing masks in class for months.
Really?
Yeah, and I suppose you'd have to ask individual kids how they feel about that and how inconvenienced they feel by it.
Right.
Sadly, I suppose, for youngsters, the longer it goes on, the more it does become just something that they have, learned to get used to.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that it's a good thing.
Right.
It's just if it's something that's inflicted upon you, then I suppose you just find ways to.
Well, this is the trouble, isn't it? I mean, I've been talking to people in the last few days about the kind of supplicants that people suffer from now, where they ask, rather than saying, "What the hell do you mean I can't go to Greece?" They ask instead, "Oh, when will I be able to go on holiday?" And you go, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, that's an interesting tipping point, where once upon a time we assumed that we were entitled to do things, anything in fact, unless there was a specific law that prohibited us from doing it.
Yeah.
And now it's flipped through 180 degrees, and now a lot of people are operating on the assumption that they're not allowed to do anything unless they ask an authority figure first, and get a chitty.
I know. It's amazing.
That they can show whoever asks.
And I suppose that's a natural kind of progression from months and months and months of just literally being forced into a situation. But that's why it's interesting what you say about mask wearing, because, I mean, I got a couple of tweets yesterday from people. One was a nurse who said, well, I wear a mask all day, every day, and sometimes I forget to take it off when I get into the car because I'm so used to wearing it. Another woman said, my granddaughter goes to school in Dubai and they've been wearing masks forever and nobody thinks anything of it. Well, I'm sorry. I do not want my children to wear a mask in school every single hour of every single day. I think it's good for them.
No, I mean, you can make kids do anything. That's a fact. We used to have 6-year-olds in factories. We used to have kids in the coal mines.
Those were the days.
Kids can be easily, acculturated to almost anything you want them to do. But obviously, there'd be schools are thought about what was actually good for them. I don't think it's good for them. I mean, the idea that, of course, I mean, a nurse or people working in theatre, surgery, in those kind of situations, of course, they're wearing masks all day. I would too if I had that job.
Right.
But I don't wear a welder's mask all day because I'm not a welder.
Right.
There's a place for these things, and I don't think the place for it. Kids, what worries me as much, if not more, is I'm already hearing we've talked about it before. They're talking about getting the kids back into school and having cancelling summer holidays and having sort of pressuring them through to catch up, as though it was their fault that they're falling behind, which it isn't. And for me, the absolute 24-karat gold priority is that when the children go back to school, they go back into normal school.
Yes.
That would be my objective,
right.
Where they're not worried about masks. They're not worried about, tests and things getting stuck up their nose or down their throats to take swabs. You get them back into school and you reacquaint them with normality.
Yes. You
don't get them back in bums on seats and then say, right, we've now got to catch up for the year you missed. The kids are desperately stressed, worried about all sorts of things, and they are worried about their educations and their futures. And the last thing they need is to go back into a school environment where they're told, right, the race is on and it's catch up now or fail.
Well, that's right.
Wrong.
Well, that is wrong. And also, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of parents over the last sort of 24 hours or so, and they're saying to me, well, either it's safe to go back to school or it's not. And if it's safe to go back to school, why do you need a mask? Why do you need to be tested? Why do you need a vaccine?
Well, I get shouted at for saying this, but I don't see anything changing much anytime soon. Based on what has happened before, I think if the policy is to maintain mass testing, then if and when we open up and whatever, open schools, open shops, open pubs, open theatres, open, if they keep testing, the number will go back up again, and they'll have all the justification, in inverted commas, that they've ever required to lock down again.
Right.
I think the idea that this is the last lockdown is a fantasy. I really do. And I can also, you can see the way in which everything about climate change, which had sort of gone into abeyance. We weren't hearing so much about that for a year.
Yeah.
And it's back again. And I could easily see circumstances in which there's a neat sort of segue, a sort of sleight of hand, where the restrictions that have been in place to control COVID could conveniently become restrictions that would bring down the amount of carbon emissions.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, planes are on the ground, cars are parked on the pavement.
Absolutely. I mean,
people aren't going anywhere, and they might well say, well, this used to be about COVID, but hey, now that we've all learned to not go anywhere, not travel anywhere, stay in our houses, that could quite easily be, by a sleight of hand, that could become, and now it's about carbon emissions.
Yeah. Because it's based on the same nonsense of modelling and, projection and, what the future truth will be rather than what the actual current truth is. And you can very easily see, I would imagine, Neil, people sort of shaking their fist at you for driving down the road in a car instead of being on a bike. Yeah,
there is no way, short of putting, short of military curfews and whatever, and people being shot on sight, there is no way that a government it can maintain control of people. The only way it works, short of that kind of, Eastern Bloc coercion, is if people police each other.
Right.
And to some extent, that's already been achieved. You need neighbour watching neighbour, and you need people controlled by the censure of their peers, so that things like smoking, that didn't diminish in the way that it has because of laws. It became something that you were pariah if you were smoking in an office or smoking in a shop.
Yeah, people assumed that if you were still smoking, despite all of the warnings about it, that you must be an idiot, effectively.
So that's how that's done.
Yeah.
It's we police societies are trained to and molded into policing each other, and that much has already been achieved.
Yes, exactly right. Let's talk a bit about what the SNP are up to, because Nicola Sturgeon yesterday refusing to go further than Boris Johnson, refusing to lift the sanctions which she's put into place on the grounds that it's not time, and as you say, she's not ready to do it yet. But quite extraordinary what's going on there, isn't it? I mean, you wrote at the weekend that for the last 14 years the SNP's been in charge of Scotland effectively. And they're ruining it.
Yeah, the SNP have been in power for too long. I think that's 14 years. Presumably, I can't even remember, but I'm quite sure when the SNP got into a position of power, they were saying, right, bear with us for a little while, and we'll make Scotland a better place. I mean, that's what political parties, that's what governments trade on. We will now improve the lot of the many.
Yeah.
And if you can't. If after 14 years, all the evidence shows that you've made everything worse, then you can't do it, and you've been in place for too long. And everything has gone down: education, health, the hospitals that can't open. 100 years ago, one in every a tenth of the world's shipping was built on the Clyde. Now we can't build a couple of ferries. They're rusting hulks on the Clyde.
Yeah. The
bridge that has to close because if it's icy, blocks of ice could wreck cars.
Right.
All sorts of scandals about individual SNPs. The person who is being groomed effectively as the First Minister's successor, Mackay. I mean, he had to step away because he had been sending hundreds of tweets to a schoolboy, calling him cute. So he had to step away. There are legion. The scandalous and tawdry allegations about one SNP MSP after another are too many to mention. They've just been there for too long. It's a fatigue that sets in, an inertia that sets in. They've had long enough to make Scotland a better place, and by most metrics, they've made Scotland a worse place.
Right.
And they've
made it a much less tolerant place. I mean, I lived in Scotland up until about 2008, I think I left, and up until then, devolution was actually seeming like quite a good idea. Jack McConnell was the First Minister. He's a decent guy. I got to know him quite well. He doesn't agree with me about everything, and he banned smoking when I still smoked, which I constantly blame him for. But it did make me give up in the end. But, devolution was working somehow. But now it seems like a beast that's kind of eating itself.
Well, I would say that the what they call the Salmond inquiry has been a stress test for the devolution settlement and the Assembly, the Parliament in Scotland, and it's breaking under that stress test. That we don't have a second chamber, a House of Lords, as it were, to scrutinise what's going on. And the idea was always that they would have these very strong independent committees that would have the necessary powers, the teeth, to scrutinise and to make sure that everything was above board. And these committees were trumpeted as going to be, the most open and empowered, far-reaching, bodies. And that was how that was all going to be managed. Now, the proof of that would have been in the pudding of the Salmond inquiry. And
yes.
I would just invite anyone south of the border to consider what would be happening if this situation was unfolding in Westminster. Hypothetically, if you had a sitting Tory Prime Minister who was having allegations made about him by a former Tory Prime Minister, and that who was saying that that he or she had been accused of all sorts of sexual wrongs, that he'd been cleared of that in court, but was alleging that there had been a conspiracy that even the present Prime Minister had been a part of to ruin that person's life and to have them sent to jail for the rest of their lives. Now, that would have been the media would be over that like a cheap suit.
Oh yeah.
They'd be watching every move of it, and it would be dominating every broadcast round the clock. And now we've got a situation where the Crown Office in Scotland, which is the equivalent of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service in England, is now meddling in an inquiry, a public inquiry that's being carried out by
this is what I couldn't
by the
understand.
Parliament. That is wrong. That is demonstrably wrong.
Yeah, I mean, their sort of investigation, or their interruption, if you like, of this committee hearing yesterday seemed bizarre, because I didn't understand what their reasoning was, because the information that they're seeking to block is already out there in the public domain, has already been published in The Spectator, has already been talked about quite substantially in various forms of the media, and yet here they are attempting to kind of stop it from being discussed at one single committee, which has caused Alex Salmond to once again reverse his decision to go before them. It seems ludicrous.
I mean, again, I would just say I would invite anyone to imagine what the reaction would be in public and in the media if an inquiry in Westminster, if a public inquiry in Westminster was being interfered with by the CPS.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I don't even think the CPS could do such a thing. I really don't think they have that sort of power, and neither should the Crown Office have that sort of power. But clearly they were presumably instructed by the First Minister to do it.
Yeah, I don't. It is definitely becoming so. It's of legally speaking, it's now of such Byzantine complexity that it's getting into territory where you'd need a legal mind or a legal qualification really to properly to follow what's going on. What I feel and what I know a lot of other people around me feel is that Scotland deserves better than this. If this is where devolution, if the nature of the devolution settlement has given us this, then this is not good enough.
No.
And the people of Scotland deserve better than this. I don't see any way in which you can deny that. A lot of it has to do with the way how it looks and the way it's being perceived. Now, we've got a First Minister here who is more than happy to stand up and say that she believes that in being scrutinised, in being open, in being honest, but the conduct of her conduct and that of the SNP and this SNP-dominated committee, so that the SNP is scrutinising itself. I mean, how that is supposed to work, I don't know. It doesn't look good. And there's a growing number of people that feel from within Scotland that it just feels like mafia.
Yeah.
It feels more like a crime family than anything else.
It does.
And that is how it looks.
And any kind of dissent is treated as malfeasance almost. It's not treated as it should be. It's not taken on board. It's not kind of discussed. You are basically the enemy of the state if you've got something to say which you disagree with something the SNP are doing. I mean, you mentioned in your piece that Willie Rennie, the head of the Lib Dems, who we had on the show actually on Monday, has basically castigated the education system in Scotland, which used to be world class, and said it's not fit for purpose.
That is a genuine heartbreaker for a lot of people in Scotland. It might be hard to, I don't know, to sort of to empathise with the extent to which Scottish people were so proud of the education that was freely available to one and all.
Right.
We used to, my parents, when I was growing up, it was celebrated. It was shouted from the highest hills, the quality of the education that was available here, and the idea of the lad of Perts, the boy or the girl from the most modest background, could through the education that was freely available achieve the highest office, go anywhere in the world, go and succeed there. That's what we told each other, and that's what we told ourselves, and fundamentally it was true.
Yeah, but also it was borne out, Neil, wasn't it? It was borne out by the number of Scottish people in government in Britain, as a general rule, at the top of professions, at the top of companies. I mean, it was a very proud country, Scotland, because it produced these very smart people.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't subscribe to exceptionalism and claiming some kind of honour because a set of coincidences meant that you were born at a set of coordinates.
Yeah.
But it was definitely the case that you knew that as someone who had been raised in Scotland and that you had gone to school in Scotland, that it was very much your own fault if you hadn't been able to grasp that and take advantage of it and do whatever you wanted. It was low-hanging fruit. And I mean, education is the building block of everything for people coming up. And it was brilliant. And and Scotland was a fantastic place to go to school.
Yeah.
Any school in Scotland.
Right.
They were turning in results that were on league tables, that held their heads up high in the wider world. Right. Scotland's had to take itself off those league tables.
Of course it has.
Because it's too embarrassing.
Yeah.
Where we were a sort of a Man United or a Rangers, we're Accrington Stanley now, and we're
my dad. I've mentioned my dad many times to you, but he had this great phrase, which I've no doubt I will get into trouble for repeating. But he used to say, "There's no such thing as the average Englishman; they're all below average." And I used to find that very amusing. He used to say it to people as well. He used to wind them up no end. But the Scots had the ability to be able to defend that sort of position because they were very well educated. And like you say, I mean, now the Scots are a kind of inward-looking, tiny-minded race of people who don't want anyone coming in from the outside. And Nicola Sturgeon's kind of policy about keeping people away is just feeding into that.
Let me just qualify that there. I mean, we the kind of Scottish person that still exists, and there's plenty of us. We might even be the majority. We are as horrified by that persona as you are, as anybody is. The Scots that I mix with are the Scots that have always been here.
Yes,
they are decent, fantastic sense of humour, self-deprecating, also proud, a wonderful culture, welcoming. It's the legend that was the Scottish personality. Well, it still exists, and people of that ilk are as horrified by the kind of Ian Blackford representation of Scottishness that is out there on stage. That is not Scotland. That is the SNP, and that's a different animal.
Yes, no, I totally get that, and I think a lot of people do. But equally, it's damaging the Scottish kind of image because people in England now say, well, I'll tell you what, if you want to have a referendum on Scottish independence, give it to us in England, and they'll be gone quicker than you can say, Hogmanay.
I hear the same thing, and I can understand why. If you're bombarded with that representation of Scotland all the time, that SNP representation of Scotland, then I'm sure you would feel like that.
Yeah.
But the Scot, as I understand, the Scot is still here. And we just don't get the microphone or the stage. And the devolution settlement, as I say, has been stress tested over and over again, most recently and most pertinently and most revealingly by this so-called inquiry, and it's not fit for purpose. And I'll say it every opportunity, every chance I get. Scotland is better than this and deserves better than this.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Neil, we're out of time, unfortunately, but fascinating stuff. And I mean, at some point or other, Alex Salmond will presumably appear before this committee. And at some point or other, he will be able to say what he wants to say. Neil Oliver, thank you very much indeed. Archaeologist, TV presenter, man of the people, a man who talks an awful lot of common sense and also talks for the whole of Scotland. When you know people from Scotland, and you, as I do, you know that they are not like Nicola Sturgeon. They are not the kind of inward-looking, frightened, timorous beasties, as Rabbie Burns would say, who don't want any visitors from England, who don't want any visitors from abroad, who don't want any visitors to come to Scotland because they might spread the virus. Absolute and utter claptrap. This is Talk Radio.